The kitchen reeked of grease and burned vegetables, heavy enough to choke me. My father's bark, "Shut up," cut through the air, sharp as a blade, and something inside my ribs cracked like glass. Pain stole my breath, but my sister's laugh filled the silence, cruel and eager. I gripped the counter, praying my legs wouldn't fold. Then the front door opened. Dr. Patel's eyes found me, sweat-drenched, gasping, clutching my side. In that single moment, I realised the truth. Silence had always been my survival. But tonight, silence might be the very thing that killed me. The heat in the kitchen pressed down like a weight, the air thick with grease, onions, and the sour tang of vegetables left too long in boiling water. My shirt clung damp to my back, and every movement felt like scraping against a bruise I couldn't see. When I bent to lift a roasting pan from the oven, the sharp pulse in my ribs flared, stealing the rhythm from my breath. I set the pan down hard, the clatter too loud, and in an instant my father's voice cut through everything. "Shut up!" 2 words hurled like stones. His tone wasn't raised, but it never needed to be. He had a way of making silence heavier than any shout. My side screamed, but I swallowed the sound, gripping the counter as though holding on might keep me upright. Behind him, my sister leaned against the doorway, arms folded, eyes lit with something that looked too much like amusement. Tessa's laugh came sharp, bright and cruel. "She's acting again," she said, not to me, but for him, for the audience she'd always played to. The ache in my ribs deepened with every breath, but the fear of being seen as weak was sharper still. So I moved, slow, deliberate, wiping the counter, rinsing a dish, pretending my chest wasn't tightening with each small task. My father watched without expression, a general inspecting his soldier. I'd been taught since childhood that weakness was performance and performance was betrayal. So I performed strength, even as the edges of my vision blurred. Then his hand was on me, a shove, not violent enough to leave a mark, but enough to demand I stand straighter. The sudden jolt snapped something inside. Pain shot white-hot through my ribs, so sharp my knees nearly buckled. My hand slipped from the counter, the dish towel dropping to the floor in a soft, mocking spiral. For a second, I thought I might collapse completely. Tessa's laugh rose again, richer this time, as though my stumble had been the punchline of a joke only she understood. My father's eyes narrowed. "Don't start." His words weren't a command so much as a warning. "Don't make me look foolish." I wanted to answer, to tell him something was wrong, but the habit was older than me. I was raised on silence, conditioned to swallow pain until it sat like a stone in my chest. The word "fine" hovered on my tongue, ready to save me again, even as the truth roared in my body. The door opened then, a cold draught slicing through the heavy air. Dr. Patel stepped inside, his coat still dusted with frost. His eyes moved quickly over the scene, the mess of pots, the roast steaming on the counter, my father's looming figure, and then stopped on me. "Nora," he said carefully, as though testing the weight of my name. His gaze locked on the way I clutched my side, the shallow rise and fall of my chest. In 3 strides, he was close enough to see the sweat beading my hairline, the tremor in my hands. "What happened here?" "She's fine," Victor snapped before I could speak. His voice carried the finality of a judge, as if declaring it so would make it true. But Dr. Patel didn't move back. He leaned closer, lowering his voice in a tone that cut through the fog in my head. "You're not breathing right. Your posture. It's protective. Something's wrong." He straightened, his expression hardening as he looked at my father. "She needs medical attention. Now." "No." The word from Victor was flat, immovable. "She's exaggerating." Tessa smirked, eyes flicking from me to him, satisfied at the alignment. I wanted to deny the pain, to let silence protect me like it always had. But the band around my ribs tightened, each breath shallower than the last. Between my father's command and the doctor's insistence, I stood frozen, the weight of 2 worlds pressing in. One where silence kept me alive in his house, and another where silence might very well kill me in my own skin. The sound of tyres crunching on the driveway came first, followed by hurried footsteps. Moments later, 2 EMTs stepped into the kitchen, their jackets unzipped, equipment bags swinging. The room shifted instantly, their presence cutting through the haze of tension like a blade through fog. One of them, a woman with clipped words and steady hands, guided me gently into a chair. "Pulse ox," she said. A sensor clipped onto my finger, its small red light glowing. A beep followed, then another, uneven. 88, she announced, and her eyes flicked up to her partner. Too low. I tried to insist I was fine, that it was nothing, but the words caught on my throat. Victor stood nearby, arms folded, jaw clenched. "She doesn't need all this," he muttered. But the EMTs weren't listening to him. They were listening to the numbers. "Mum, we're moving you," the woman said. A stretcher appeared from the hallway as if conjured, its metal frame rattling softly. The room spun as they eased me down, straps tightened across my chest, my ribs protesting every shift. The ceiling lights blurred above me. As they wheeled me outside, the cold air slapped my face, sharp and shocking. I tried to focus on it, to anchor myself. But as the stretcher lifted into the back of the ambulance, the past shoved its way in. I was 8 again, standing at the sink with my arm bent wrong. A sickening angle beneath my sleeve. I had fallen from the low branch of the oak tree in the yard, bones screaming with every breath. But my father had ordered me to finish the dishes before he'd even considered taking me in. I remembered soap bubbles sliding down my wrist, the ache so bright I could barely see, and his voice telling me I was acting. Hours later, the X-ray had proven the fracture, but by then the shame had already settled in. The memory bled into the present. My chest rose in shallow bursts, the monitor beeping in rhythm. The EMT sitting beside me tightened the strap of oxygen around my face. "Small breaths, let it in slow," she said, calm but firm. I obeyed, the air cool against my lungs, though each expansion stabbed. Across from me, her partner called ahead to the hospital, his words quick, efficient. "Possible rib fractures. Suspected internal bleeding, oxygen sat 88, improving with O2. Patient alert, distressed." The words felt clinical, detached, as though they belonged to someone else, but the tremor in my body reminded me they were mine. The ambulance swayed, and every jolt sent a flare through my ribs. I closed my eyes, willing myself to stay tethered to the present. The siren keened, stretching time into something elastic. I clung to the sound of it, strange comfort in its steadiness. When the doors burst open again, the hospital lights poured in, white and unforgiving. Hands guided the stretcher down, the cold replaced by sterile brightness and antiseptic. Voices overlapped. Blood pressure low. Prep for imaging. Keep her stable. Inside the ER, monitors bloomed around me. A nurse slid a cuff around my arm. Another placed stickers across my chest. A doctor leaned over, her tone brisk. "Pain location?" I managed to point weakly to my side. Her fingers pressed lightly against the spot, and the pain shot sharp, stealing sound from my lungs. She nodded once, confirming what she suspected. "Rib fractures likely. We need imaging. Possible bleed." Victor had followed to the doorway, his face unreadable, his body a wall of resistance. "She's exaggerating," he said again, but softer now, the certainty wobbling. And then beyond him, Dr. Patel stepped into the frame. His presence was calm, steady, anchoring me in the chaos. His eyes found mine. Not scanning, not questioning, but seeing. The look held no suspicion, no calculation, only recognition. Belief. For a moment, the pain eased. Not in my ribs, but in the weight I'd carried for years. Someone saw me. Someone believed me without forcing me to prove it. That single glance from Dr. Patel felt louder than all the silence I had ever endured. The hospital ceiling faded from view, and with it came the gravity of memory. My life had been shaped long before this night, in a house where silence was currency and obedience was survival. When my mother died, I was 7. The house felt emptier than the church we buried her in, and yet it rang louder than ever with my father's commands. Victor did not grieve the way I did. Where I cried into my pillow until sleep pulled me under, he reorganised the kitchen, rewrote the chore chart, and insisted nothing in our lives should change, except that everything did. Without my mother's softness, the house hardened. Victor ran it like a job site, each room a station, each child a worker. Schedules were pinned to the refrigerator, lights out enforced with military precision. He was the foreman, judge, and executioner of even the smallest detail. A spilled glass of milk could earn an hour of gutter cleaning. A forgotten homework sheet might cost a weekend of scrubbing floors. Tessa learned quickly. She smiled on command, echoed his words, brought him his coffee without being asked. She was the golden child, and she wore the role like a medal. Praise rolled off her in waves, and the glow from his approval never seemed to dim. I was different. Too quiet, too quick to feel, too unwilling to bend my voice into his. That difference branded me a burden. My mistakes became spectacles, lessons for Tessa to avoid. One winter, when I was 10, fever wrapped around me like chains. My skin burned, my throat raw, yet the snow had piled knee-high outside. Victor ordered the driveway cleared, his voice sharp against the cold glass. Tessa, wrapped in blankets at the window, watched me stagger into the snow with a shovel too heavy for my arms. Each scoop sent ice down my throat, each breath a rasp. "You're dramatic," Victor said when I stumbled back inside, cheeks grey, eyes watering. Tessa's laughter chimed behind him, sweet and cruel, as though my struggle was theatre staged for her amusement. The message repeated through the years. My pain was not real. Illness was laziness. Weakness was defiance. And every time I tried to protest, my voice collapsed against the wall of his certainty. But there was something else, hidden deep. Years later, while searching through a box in the attic, I found an envelope tucked between old recipe cards, my mother's handwriting, soft loops on yellowed paper. The letter wasn't long, but it carried the weight of her fear. "I worry about the way he looks at them," she had written, "like tools, not children. I try to soften it, but I'm afraid what will happen if I'm not here." I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, the dust stinging my nose, the letter trembling in my hands. For the first time, I realised my silence wasn't just mine. It had been hers too. She had seen the storm in him, and even she had not been able to stop it. I hid the letter back in the box, terrified of what Victor would do if he discovered I'd read it. But I carried its truth in me. My mother had feared him too. The house hadn't eaten only my voice. It had started by swallowing hers. Coming back had felt like failure from the start. After losing my job in the city, the savings evaporated quickly. Rent, groceries, bills, they swallowed me whole until the only place left to go was the apartment above my father's garage. It was supposed to be temporary, a stopgap until I found work. But Victor welcomed me back with a smile too sharp, the kind that never reached his eyes. It wasn't kindness, it was victory. Within days, the old rules were back in place. My mornings began at 5 sharp. Chores lined up like soldiers. Shovel the walk, clear the gutters, scrub the oil from the garage floor. If I lagged, Victor barked. If I finished early, he found something new. Even my phone wasn't mine. "Don't waste time," he warned, as though every text or call was evidence of laziness. The truck keys stayed in his pocket, leaving me stranded unless I asked for permission. The walls closed in quickly. My body remembered the rhythm of obedience even as my spirit buckled. And when the ache in my ribs began, a small throb after lifting a box of dishes, I ignored it. To speak of pain was to invite ridicule. The announcement came one grey morning over breakfast. Victor, hunched over his coffee and notebook, declared that the family would host a dinner for Bernice Turner's 82nd birthday. "Nora will handle the menu, the cooking, the house," he said, never looking up. Tessa, perched across from me with her phone, grinned. "Of course I'll help." Her tone carried the weight of what she really meant. "I'll supervise and I'll watch you fail." From that moment, my days blurred into preparation. Lists, shopping, scrubbing until my hands ached. The pain in my side worsened, spreading like a bruise beneath the skin. Each morning I woke tighter, stiffer, but I said nothing. To admit weakness was to forfeit ground I couldn't afford to lose. Tessa visited daily under the guise of helping. She leaned against door frames, scrolling her phone, pointing out dust on the baseboards or streaks on the windows. "You missed a spot," she'd sing, her lips curling. Then she'd hand out me boxes heavier than necessary, watch me strain with a satisfaction she didn't bother to hide. One afternoon she brought decorations, streamers, balloons, and a crate of china so heavy it made my knees shake. "You can carry this, right?" she asked, already knowing the answer, already smiling when I staggered beneath the weight. The pain shot hot across my ribs, and I bit down hard to keep from gasping. "Careful," she said sweetly. "We wouldn't want you to drop anything. Dad hates clumsy." Her words landed like blows. It wasn't just about chores or control. It was about belonging. She was reminding me that in this house, family was conditional. Obedience earned you a place. Pain erased it. By the time the date of the dinner loomed, my body was unravelling. Each step was measured, each breath shallow. But Tessa's laughter chased me through every hallway, and Victor's silence weighed heavier than his words. The night before the celebration, as I set the final tablecloth and smoothed its edges, Tessa leaned in close. "Don't mess this up, Nora. This family doesn't need dead weight." It wasn't just an insult. It was exile, spoken plainly. My place in the house was never guaranteed, and she was reminding me I could be erased at any moment. The ache in my ribs throbbed in time with her words, and for the first time I realised she wanted me to break. She wanted me gone. And the cruelest part was that she would call it loyalty to family. The fluorescent lights in the ER hummed above me, steady and cold. A nurse wheeled the X-ray machine into place, her movements efficient, her eyes avoiding mine except for brief instructions. Hold still, deep breath, again. Each inhale felt like knives spreading inside my chest, and I couldn't stop the hiss of pain that slipped past my lips. Hours blurred together in the antiseptic haze, until the doctor finally returned, chart in hand, her expression clipped into professionalism. "2 fractured ribs," she said, her voice brisk, "and a small hemothorax, blood pooling near the lung. We'll need to admit you for observation, monitor for complications." Her words settled over me like a verdict. Proof, undeniable, visible proof that what I felt was real. The fracture lines etched into the X-ray, the shadow of blood dark against white bone. It was all there. And yet part of me braced for dismissal, for someone to insist I was exaggerating, as always. The curtain rustled and another presence filled the room. Aunt Lila. She carried the winter in with her. Cheeks flushed, coat still zipped, breath quick from rushing through the halls. Her eyes found me instantly, softening at the sight, and in that moment my practised mask cracked. "I'm fine," I started, the lie instinctive, automatic, but the sight of her face, the crease of worry in her brow, unspooled me. My voice faltered and the tears came fast, hot, unstoppable. "Oh, honey," she whispered, crossing the room in 2 strides. She took my hand, grounding me, her grip steady where mine shook. "You don't have to be fine, not with me." The years of silence buckled. Words tumbled out, fragments, half-sentences, memories I had swallowed down for decades. The driveway in winter, the oak tree fracture, the laughter that followed every stumble. My chest ached as much from speaking as from injury, but I couldn't stop. Lila listened, her jaw tight, eyes fierce though her voice stayed calm. "You should never have had to carry this alone." She smoothed the hair back from my forehead, the way my mother once did, and for the first time in years I felt like a child allowed to be comforted. The curtain opened again and Dr. Patel entered, his expression taut but determined. He glanced at Lila, then at me. "The scans confirm it," he said quietly, as though he knew the weight of his words. "This wasn't imagined. You're injured and it needs to be documented." I opened my mouth to protest, the word fine still clinging stubbornly, but he shook his head. "I'll write a statement. I saw what happened. I'll stand by it." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "You don't have to fight this alone anymore." The promise in his voice shook something loose in me. For years, no one inside that house had believed me. Now here was someone not only believing but willing to stand with me. As he left to speak with the medical staff, a nurse lingered by my bedside, her voice low. "You should consider a protective order," she said, her tone gentle but matter of fact. "With the records, the witness accounts, it's possible." A protective order. The phrase itself felt foreign, heavy with possibilities I had never let myself imagine. Safety, not conditional. Safety enforced. I turned to Lila, searching her face for permission, for direction. She squeezed my hand, her voice certain. "We'll do whatever it takes. He doesn't get to write the story anymore." and for the first time I let myself believe she might be right. Later that night, after the nurses dimmed the lights and the hum of machines softened into background noise, Aunt Lila reached into her bag. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out an envelope, worn soft from years of being handled. "I wasn't sure when to show you this," she said, placing it gently on the blanket across my lap, "but now feels like the time." I hesitated before opening it, the paper fragile beneath my hands. Inside, my mother's handwriting curved across the page, familiar even after decades. The words cut sharp despite their faded ink. "I fear the way he rules this house," she had written. "The children are not soldiers. They are not tools. I worry what will happen to them if I'm not here." My chest tightened, not from injury this time, but from the weight of her voice reaching across years. My mother had known. She had seen the storm inside Victor, and she had tried, in her own quiet way, to leave a record. Proof that it wasn't just me. Proof that even she had been afraid. Lila touched my arm, her expression fierce. "She wanted you to know it wasn't your imagination. She knew." I folded the letter carefully, holding it against me as if it could protect my fractured ribs from the inside. The next day blurred into a montage of evidence gathering, X-rays pinned to light boards showing clean white bone interrupted by jagged cracks. EMT reports typed in clinical detail, low oxygen, shallow breathing, visible distress. Dr. Patel's preliminary statement, concise and steady, each piece stacked into a growing pile of truth that felt both liberating and terrifying. Still, my instinct pushed back. Harmony had been my survival strategy for 40 years. Keep the peace, swallow the pain, pretend it was fine. To speak out felt like tearing down the last shield I had left. "I don't want to make it worse," I whispered to Lila as she organised the papers. "If I stay quiet, maybe it will pass." Her eyes blazed. "It's already worse, look at you." But my hesitation lingered, until the phone buzzed. A nurse handed it over, explaining that a message had come through while I was asleep. I unlocked the screen, and there it was, Tessa's voice, frozen in text. "Don't embarrass Dad. You always make things bigger than they are. Maybe now he'll finally teach you for good." My hands shook as I read it again, each word heavier than the last. She hadn't just dismissed me. She wanted me broken. The decision solidified in that moment, sharp as glass. Silence had protected them for too long. When Dr. Patel returned to check on my vitals, I asked him to stay. The nurse came back with forms, her expression kind but firm. My hand hovered over the page for only a second before the pen pressed down. My signature carved itself across the paper, black ink staking a claim to my own life. Lila squeezed my hand, tears glinting in her eyes. "That's it," she said softly. "You've taken it back." And as I set the pen down, my ribs still aching, my chest tight, I felt something new stir beneath the pain. An ember of power I hadn't known was still inside me. The story broke 3 days later. It wasn't front-page news, just a modest column in the Midwest Chronicle. But in a town like ours, even a whisper could become thunder. Local contractor under investigation for just a domestic assault. The words were blunt, unavoidable, printed in black against the grainy paper. My father's name, Victor Whitman, sat there like a crack in marble. I stared at it from the hospital bed, my stomach knotting. I had imagined this moment for years, wondered what it would feel like to see his authority punctured in public. I thought it would be triumph. Instead it was terror, because I knew exactly what would come next. That night my phone lit with a blocked number. I let it ring out, then listened to the voicemail. His voice bled through the speaker, tight with fury and control. Ungrateful, dramatic, you've destroyed this family. You think strangers will save you. You've embarrassed me, Nora. You've humiliated your sister. Do you know what you've done? The words dripped venom, rehearsed and deliberate. Then faintly, Tessa's laugh in the background, her tone almost playful. She always needs an audience. I dropped the phone onto the sheets as though it had burned me. The recording replayed itself in my head until I couldn't tell where his voice ended and my own thoughts began. Lila, seated in the chair by my bed, picked up the phone with steady hands. "We'll save this," she said, forwarding the message to her own device. "It's evidence." Evidence. The word still felt strange. For so long my pain had been invisible. Now every piece of cruelty left a trail that could be traced. But the worst twist didn't come from Victor's threats. It came from Tessa. 2 days later, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Daria, a girl who had once been Tessa's closest friend in high school. We hadn't spoken in years, but her words arrived sharp and urgent. I don't know if this helps, but I thought you should see this. Attached was a screenshot of a group chat. My sister's name glowing in the thread, her words casual, mocking. Dad will handle her. He always does. Honestly, she needs it. Maybe now she'll finally shut up. I read it 3 times, the letters refusing to arrange themselves into anything but betrayal. Tessa hadn't just laughed at my pain. She had celebrated it, broadcasted it, turned my suffering into entertainment. I felt my ribs ache in rhythm with the message, each breath shallow, ragged. Lila's face hardened as she looked over my shoulder. She gave herself away, she said. No more pretending she's just standing by. I wanted to weep, but the tears refused to come. What settled instead was something heavier, colder, the clarity of finality. Tessa wasn't my ally. She wasn't even neutral. She had chosen her place beside him long ago, and now she had left her fingerprints on the weapon. The war of stories had begun. His voicemail dripping with anger, her messages glowing with cruelty, the headlines whispering to neighbours. I was no longer invisible. Every word written or spoken carved the battlefield deeper. I closed my eyes, exhaustion pulling at me, but beneath it all was something new. A rhythm steadier than the beeping monitors, louder than my father's voice echoing through memory, proof stacking, story shifting, silence cracking. For the first time I began to wonder if the truth could actually be louder than him. The papers stacked higher on the bedside table, x-rays, doctor's notes, the EMT report, and now, at the very top, the court-issued document with its heavy seal. Temporary order of protection. The words stared back at me with a gravity I hadn't known was possible. For 40 years, safety had been conditional, dependent on obedience, on silence, on performing strength I didn't have. Now, a judge's signature declared it outright. Victor could not come near me, could not call, could not step across the fragile perimeter of my life. Lila touched the edge of the paper, her voice quiet but steady. This means he doesn't get to decide anymore. I wanted to believe her, but the town was not as clear-cut as the court order. By the time I was discharged from the hospital, the story had spread like fire in a dry field. At the grocery store, whispers carried faster than footsteps. Some people turned their carts away from me, eyes cold, lips pressed thin. Others reached out, subtle nods, murmurs of support when no one else was listening. 2 worlds formed overnight, those who believed and those who didn't. I overheard a woman at the pharmacy mutter, "Families fight, doesn't mean you drag them to court." Her companion nodded, never meeting my eyes, but the clerk who rang me up later slipped a note into my bag. "You're brave. I saw things too. The division carved through every familiar street, every corner store, every pew in church." The silence I had once been forced into now echoed back at me, doubled by the doubt of others. And then one evening, as Lila and I sat in her kitchen sorting through another stack of documents, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Caldwell, our neighbour from across the street when I was a child, stood there with a tin of cookies clutched awkwardly in her hands. Her hair was thinner, her steps slower than I remembered, but her eyes still sharp. "I heard what's happening," she said without preamble, setting the tin on the table, "and I need to tell you something." She lowered herself into a chair, folding her hands. "Years ago I saw you in the yard. You couldn't have been more than 12. There was a bruise, dark, spreading across your arm. You were hanging laundry, moving stiffly. I asked if you were all right, and your father answered for you. He said you fell, but you shook your head just once. I never forgot it." My throat tightened. The memory was buried deep, but her words unlocked it. The clothesline, the sting of clothespins, the ache in my arm. I had thought no one noticed. Mrs. Caldwell reached across the table, her fingers trembling but resolute. "If you need me to speak, I will. I should have said something back then. I won't stay silent now." Her offer cut through me sharper than the pain in my ribs. For so long, silence had been my prison. shared and enforced by everyone around us. Now, here was a voice from the past, finally breaking free. I nodded, unable to speak, tears sliding hot down my cheeks. That night, when I lay in Leela's guest room, the air cool and still, I felt something I hadn't in decades. My lungs ached, but they filled. My ribs protested, but they expanded, and for the first time since childhood, I drew a deep breath all the way in and let it out, slow and steady. It wasn't just oxygen, it was survival. The courthouse smelled faintly of varnish and old paper, the kind of scent that clung to wood too long handled by strangers. The benches were polished smooth from decades of use, and the overhead lights cast their pale glow on dust motes drifting through the air. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my palms pressed flat against the worn surface, feeling every groove carved by restless hands before mine. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge, Ellison, a stern man with lines etched deep into his forehead, entered, robe swaying, and the sound of his gavel cracked through the chamber like thunder. The air shifted. Everything was suddenly sharper, heavier. When the prosecutor rose, she began with the evidence. Photographs of my ribs projected onto the screen, each white bone marked by dark fractures. The images felt surreal, both intimate and detached, as though I were looking at someone else's body broken in my place. Dr. Patel took the stand first. He spoke in calm, steady sentences, his voice carrying no embellishment. He described what he saw that night, my posture protective, my breathing shallow, the shove that triggered my collapse. His words were simple, clinical, but when he met my eyes, I felt again that same unspoken recognition, the first moment someone had believed me without hesitation. The EMT followed. She recalled the oxygen reading, the frantic rush to stabilise me, the urgency of transport. She was struggling, the EMT said firmly, glancing towards Victor at the defence table. This wasn't dramatic, it was medical reality. Lila's turn came next. She unfolded the letter from my mother, her hands steady, though her voice carried tremors of old grief. She read aloud the lines where my mother had written her fears. The children are not tools. I worry what will happen if I'm not here. The courtroom hushed. Even the sound of pencils stopped as the words hung heavy in the air. My mother's voice, preserved across decades, now testified for me. The prosecutor displayed the timeline, medical records stacked alongside reports, statements and text messages. Together they painted a picture that could not be dismissed as exaggeration, and then came the twist no one expected. From the back of the room, a man in a grey suit was called forward. He introduced himself as Dr. Harris, my paediatrician from childhood. I hadn't seen him in years, his hair now silver, his frame leaner. He carried with him a file box, old and battered. When asked, he opened it, revealing records yellowed with age. I was her physician when she was a child, he said, flipping through the files, and I remember there were concerns even then. He explained how Victor had often delayed bringing me in for treatment. There were notes of repeated injuries, sprains, fevers, unexplained bruises that went untreated for days or weeks. In one entry he had even written, "Father reluctant to consent to further testing. States child exaggerates symptoms." The words struck me like another blow, not from surprise, but from validation. My childhood was there in black ink, proof that the silences had been documented, just never spoken aloud. The defence lawyer shifted uncomfortably, objecting half-heartedly, but Judge Ellison overruled. The record was admissible. For a moment, I let myself look at Victor. He sat stiff, jaw tight, but his eyes flickered, betraying a ripple in his otherwise unbreakable armour. I turned back to the front, to the witnesses who had stood for me, to the evidence stacked like bricks of truth. The courtroom felt less like a place of fear and more like gravity itself, inescapable, undeniable, pulling every hidden thing into the open. And for the first time, I believed the weight might finally crush him instead of me. When it was finally his turn, Victor rose with the slow confidence of a man who had spent his whole life being obeyed. His attorney adjusted his tie, smoothed his papers, and spoke first. "This is a misunderstanding," the lawyer said. His voice measured, patient, as though explaining away a trivial domestic squabble. Families argue, tempers flare. What happened was taken out of context and exaggerated. Mr. Whitman is a respected businessman, a father who has supported his daughters since their mother's untimely passing. What you're hearing is not abuse, it's family tension magnified by stress." Victor nodded along, his hands folded neatly on the table, his face carved into calm. When invited to speak, he leaned forward, his tone rehearsed. "I never hurt my daughter. Nora misinterpreted. She always dramatised things. I told her to keep working because she's stronger than she thinks. That's all. It was never meant as cruelty, just discipline." The words echoed like old refrains, the same lines he had used my entire life. "You're exaggerating, you're dramatic, you're too soft." And for a flicker of a moment, I felt myself shrinking again, the courtroom fading into the familiar walls of his authority. Then the prosecutor pressed a button. The speakers filled with sound. His voice, recorded days earlier on my voicemail, dripped venom through the room. "Ungrateful, dramatic, you've destroyed this family, you've embarrassed me, Nora." And then Tessa's laugh, sharp and unmistakable. She always needs an audience. The courtroom shifted. Jurors glanced at each other, at Victor, at me. The words cut through his calm performance, unravelling it. No longer theory, no longer he said, she said. It was him, raw and cruel, stripped of polish. His lawyer stammered, objected weakly, but the damage had already landed. The recording didn't just contradict him, it revealed the truth in his own voice. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, my ribs aching, but my posture steady. The prosecutor asked me to recount what happened. I did not raise my voice, I did not embellish. I described the kitchen, the smell of grease, the heat of the oven, the shove that sent fire through my side. I described the laughter, the dismissal, the struggle for air. My words were plain, stripped bare. No theatrics, just truth. And in that simplicity, the silence of the courtroom grew heavy, thick. A juror dabbed her eyes, another shifted jaw tight. Even Judge Ellison leaned slightly forward, his brow furrowed in something closer to sorrow than scrutiny. When I finished, I sat back down, my hands trembling, not from fear this time, but from release. The closing arguments came quickly after. The prosecutor emphasised the mountain of evidence, medical records, witness testimony, the mother's letter, the voicemail. "This is not discipline," she said, her voice cutting clean. "This is abuse, long-standing, deliberate and proven." Victor's lawyer tried again to paint it as family drama gone too far, but the weight of the evidence left his words thin, brittle. The jury filed out, silence stretching across the room like a held breath. When they returned, it was with gravity etched into every step. "Guilty," the foreman read, "on charges of assault and violation of rights." Judge Ellison's gavel struck, the sound reverberating like a door slamming shut. Sentencing followed, jail time, mandatory counselling, restitution for medical costs, and a protective order renewed for 5 years. Victor's face hardened into stone, but his eyes flickered with disbelief. The control he had wielded for decades slipped through his grasp, replaced by chains he could not break with willpower. When the hearing ended, I stepped out of the courthouse into the cold air. The wind bit at my cheeks, sharp and clean. For the first time in years, I felt lighter than the winter sky, as though each breath belonged wholly to me. The verdict echoed through town faster than the ink dried on the court documents. Within days, Victor's name, once spoken with deference in grocery aisles and hardware stores, became something neighbours whispered about with caution. His contracting company, the empire he had built brick by brick, unravelled almost overnight. Business partners quietly severed ties. Clients cancelled projects midstream. The sign above his office was taken down, leaving only pale letters imprinted on wood where his name had once loomed in bold. For the first time, Victor's voice carried no authority. Tessa too bore the fallout. Friends who had once orbited her glow withdrew, their silence louder than any accusation. On social media, her cryptic posts about betrayal and family loyalty drew more side-eyes than sympathy. At work, whispers followed her into the break room, and within weeks she requested an indefinite leave. The sister who had always basked in approval now found herself standing alone, stripped of the validation she craved. Meanwhile, my world shifted in smaller, gentler ways. A casserole appeared on Lila's doorstep, delivered by a neighbour I barely knew. A card slipped through the mail slot, unsigned, with the words, "We believe you." Old classmates I hadn't spoken to in years sent quiet messages. I remember seeing bruises. I always wondered. I'm so sorry I never said anything. The support arrived in fragments, food, notes, nods at the market, but each piece knit together into something sturdier than I'd ever felt. Community, belief. The very things I had been denied under my father's roof now trickled in, fragile but real. And then one evening came the twist I hadn't braced for. Tessa showed up. It was late, the street lamps spilling pale circles of light across the driveway. I was sitting at Lila's kitchen table when the knock came. My aunt opened the door cautiously, and there Tessa stood, shoulders hunched, eyes red-rimmed. For the first time in years, she looked smaller than me. "Can I talk to her?" she asked softly. I nodded, though my chest tightened. She stepped inside, arms wrapped around herself as though holding in the words. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she blurted, voice cracking. I just wanted Dad to love me, to see me. I thought if I laughed at his jokes, if I stood with him, maybe he'd choose me. Everything I did, it was to keep his approval." Her tears came fast, hands covering her face. "I never thought I didn't think you'd get hurt like that. I just thought it would make me safe." I sat frozen, my ribs still aching with each shallow breath, listening to the sister who had mocked every stumble now unravel in front of me. For years I had imagined what it would feel like to hear her admit the truth. I thought it would bring relief, maybe even reconciliation. But in that moment, all I felt was the ache of a wound too deep to close with tears. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe she hadn't enjoyed my pain, hadn't smiled at my suffering. But the screenshots, the laughter, the years of complicity, they clung too tightly. Still, I recognised the truth beneath her words. She had been as hungry for his love as I had been for his belief, and she had chosen cruelty as her currency. "I wanted Dad to love me," she whispered again, her voice breaking, and for the first time I realised we had both been bargaining with the same empty bank. Tessa sat across from me at Lila's table, her hands wrapped tight around a mug she hadn't touched. The steam rose and faded, untouched like the words stuck in her throat. I listened, ribs aching, as she whispered her confessions. But when her voice faltered into silence, I knew it wasn't enough. "If you want to talk to me," I said slowly, carefully, "you need to start with 3 words. I was wrong. Not I didn't mean it. Not I only wanted Dad's approval. Just the truth. You hurt me, and you have to own it." Her eyes widened, lips parting as if the words might spill out, but instead she shook her head, a faint laugh escaping, half disbelief, half defence. "It wasn't all me. You were always so sensitive. Dad was strict with both of us. I coped differently." I felt something inside me settle, not collapse. The clarity was sharp as glass. She wasn't ready, maybe she never would be. "I can't do this unless you're honest," I said. My voice didn't tremble this time. "I won't play the old game anymore." Tessa's gaze dropped, her knuckles whitening around the mug. After a long pause, she pushed back her chair. "I guess I can't give you what you want." The door shut softly behind her, and the silence that followed was heavy but not suffocating. For once it was mine. That was the twist. For decades, silence had been my cage, forced on me until my voice atrophied. But this silence, I chose it. I closed my mouth not because I feared punishment, but because I refused to argue with someone unwilling to face the truth. In that choice, I felt something shift. The next morning, I began therapy. The counsellor's office smelled faintly of lavender, the kind of scent that insisted on calm. She asked me to breathe, slow, steady, intentional. At first, each inhale tugged against my ribs, sharp reminders of what had been broken. But with time, my lungs filled deeper, my chest expanding without panic. "Notice what it feels like to receive air," she said gently, "to let your body believe it deserves it." The words undid me. I hadn't realised how much of my life I'd spent holding my breath, waiting for the next blow, the next command. Now each inhalation felt like rebellion, each exhalation like release. Therapy became practice, not just in breathing but in acceptance. My counsellor asked me to notice compliments, to let them land without deflection. When a neighbour at the market said, "You look stronger," I didn't laugh it off. I whispered thank you. When a friend sent me a message, "You've inspired me," I wrote back heart pounding, but I didn't push it away. Piece by piece, I stitched together a version of myself that didn't depend on surviving their dismissal. And then one evening, as I sat journaling at Lila's kitchen table, the idea came. Not as a grand plan, but as a quiet spark. What if my story wasn't just mine? What if others, silenced in their own homes, could find a place to breathe together? I pictured a room, not a courtroom, not a hospital, where survivors could speak without fear of being called dramatic or weak. A forum, a circle, a community, not to wallow, but to witness, to remind each other we weren't alone, that silence didn't have to be the final word. The thought grew roots as I wrote it down, each word steadier than the last. For years, family had been a weapon wielded against me. Maybe now I could build a different kind of family, one born not of blood, but of truth. The old town hall smelled of dust and varnish, its wooden floors creaking beneath the shuffle of hesitant footsteps. Rows of oak chairs stood neatly in lines, their surfaces worn smooth by decades of use. At the front, a microphone sat perched on its stand, crackling with feedback when the volunteers tested it. The faint hum filled the room, a nervous pulse that mirrored my own. I stood near the podium, notes clutched in my hand, though I wasn't sure I'd use them. The crowd was small but steady. Neighbours, old teachers, familiar faces from the grocery store. Some avoided my eyes, others met them and held on, their silent support weightier than words. When it was time, I stepped forward. The microphone squealed briefly, then settled into a low hum. My breath trembled, but my voice carried. I grew up 2 blocks from here, I began. Most of you know me, or you think you do. You've seen me at the diner, at church, in the grocery line. But what you never saw was the silence I carried. A silence that wasn't peace, but fear. I told them about the night in the kitchen, the shove that cracked bone and stole air from my lungs. I told them about the years before, shoveling snow with a fever, being called dramatic, not the ache of being dismissed over and over. My words weren't dramatic, they were plain, measured. Truth didn't need dressing. The room was still, so quiet that even the faint buzz of the old ceiling lights felt loud. I could see people leaning forward, listening harder, their faces drawn with something between grief and recognition. Then I spoke of the courtroom, of evidence piled high, of finally being believed. For the first time, silence broke, I said, and when it did, truth was louder than fear. My hands shook as I set the notes down. That's why I'm here, to tell you that silence doesn't protect us. It protects those who harm us. And if my story can help even one person break theirs, then it's worth every breath it took to speak. I thought I was finished. I thought the silence that followed was the end of my testimony. But then movement stirred in the crowd. A man rose slowly from the 4th row. Mr. Jacobs, our old neighbour, a man who had spent years trimming hedges with military precision, who nodded politely at Victor but rarely lingered in conversation. He had always seemed neutral, uninvolved. Now his face was pale, his eyes heavy with something long carried. He cleared his throat, voice rough with age. I saw him hit you once, he said, the words tumbling into the hushed room. You were maybe 13, out by the garage. He thought no one was looking, but I was. I saw you stumble. I saw the mark after, and I did nothing. Gasps rippled through the crowd, eyes turning towards me, then towards him. My chest tightened, not with pain, but with the weight of his admission. Mr. Jacobs gripped the back of the chair in front of him, knuckles white. I told myself it wasn't my business, that it wasn't my place. But I've carried that memory for 30 years, and I can't keep silent anymore. The silence that followed wasn't suffocating this time. It was charged, alive, like oxygen catching flame. I swallowed hard, nodding once, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. His voice joined mine, and together they formed something bigger. Proof that silence could transform. Not into shame, but into fire that spread, lighting other voices in its path. By the next morning, the photographs had already spread. Someone had snapped a picture of me at the podium, microphone in hand, shoulders squared, face lit by the old town hall's yellow bulbs. Online, it carried a caption simple but striking, "Local woman turns pain into action." The image travelled further than I expected. Old classmates from distant states messaged me. Reporters called. Strangers sent emails with stories of their own, accounts of silence, survival, and the weight of being disbelieved. For the first time, my life was not hidden in the shadows of a house. It was out in the open, reflected back through hundreds of voices. That night, I sat at Lila's kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper. I wrote the words "Dear Dad" at the top, then paused. My ribs still ached faintly when I leaned over, but the ache no longer frightened me. It was just a reminder of what had already been survived. I wrote slowly, deliberately. I used to think I belonged to you, that every breath I took was borrowed from your permission. That silence was the only way to keep your house from swallowing me whole, but you don't own me anymore. I am not your soldier, not your tool, not your shadow. I am not yours at all, and I will never be again. When I finished, I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. It wasn't meant for him. It was meant for me, a marker that the line between us had finally closed. In the days that followed, I met with the small group who had attended the town hall. We sat in circles of mismatched chairs, voices low at first, then stronger as stories unfolded. Women and men, young and old, each carried their own silence, different shapes but the same weight. Listening to them, an idea rooted itself deeper. It wasn't enough to tell my story once. Others needed space to tell theirs. And maybe together we could turn silence into something more than survival. So I drafted a plan. Not a courtroom, not a hospital. This would be a workshop, a writing class. Simple at first. A place where people could put their pain into words, hold it up to the light, reshape it until it no longer held them captive. When I told Lila, her eyes shone with pride. You're giving them what you never had, she said, a voice that can't be taken away. The decision felt like another break in the old cycle, this time not of bone, but of history. Weeks later, spring arrived in full. The air carried the scent of thawed earth and blooming lilacs. The streets I once walked with my head down now felt different, each step steadier. One evening, I left Lila's house without destination, simply to walk. The sky stretched wide and blue, fading into a scatter of early stars. The wind brushed cool against my face, no longer biting, no longer heavy. I stopped at a corner where the streetlight flickered, tilted my head back and drew a deep breath. For years I had breathed like prey, shallow, quiet, waiting. Now I filled my lungs until my chest expanded fully, ribs stretching without fear. No one's permission lingered in that air. The night hummed with the quiet of possibility, and for the first time, silence was not a cage, it was freedom.